Copyright. Copyright is protected under Title 17 of the U.S. Code, which means this deals with federal law and therefore applies to everyone equally. When we look at federal law, we're going to talk about several different parts of this. We're going to start out with 17-102, and that talks about the subject matter of copyright in general. It says copyright protection subsists in accordance with this title in original works of authorship fixed in any tangible medium of expression, now known or later developed, from which they can be perceived, reproduced, or otherwise communicated, either directly or with the aid of a machine or device. Works of authorship include the following categories: literary works, musical works including any accompanying words, dramatic works including any accompanying music, pantomimes and choreographic works, pictorial, graphic, and sculptural works, motion pictures and other audiovisual works, sound recordings, and architectural works. So you can see copyright comes in and it looks a lot of different types of works that can be done. And when we deal with these, all of these therefore are subject to copyright. In no case does copyright protection for an original work of authorship extend to any idea, procedure, process, system, method of operation, concept, principle, or discovery, regardless of the form in which it is described, explained, illustrated, or embodied in such work. Now, this is a very important exclusion because what this basically excludes is creative ideas of discovery which are protected by U.S. patent. So the difference between copyright and patent. You take a photograph, it's copyright protected. You take an idea, you have to patent protect it, which is totally different because copyright protection is innate. Patent protection has to be applied for. Definitions. When we talk about audiovisual work, they are works that consist of a series of related images which are intrinsically intended to be shown by the use of machines or devices such as projectors, viewers, or electronic equipment, together with accompanying sounds, if any, regardless of the nature of the material objects, such as films or tapes, in which the works are embodied. So an audiovisual work is a series of related images. We have literary works. Literary works are, other than audiovisual works, expressed in words, numbers, or other verbal or numerical symbols or indica, regardless of the nature of the materials, such as books, periodicals, manuscripts, phonographic records, film, tapes, discs, or cards in which they are embodied. So a literary work is written word. So when you write your thesis, that is a literary work, even though it may have pictures on the inside of it. Motion pictures are audiovisual works consisting of a series of related images which, when shown in succession, impart an impression of motion together with accompanying sounds, if any. So when I go out and I make these recordings of this particular thing, this is really an audiovisual work. When I make a movie of a procedure that I'm doing to show you how to do it, that is going to be a motion picture. And notice, it doesn't say how long it has to be or how long it takes to do that particular part. Pictorial, graphic, and sculptural works include two-dimensional and three-dimensional works of fine, graphic, and applied art, photographs, prints and art reproductions, maps, globes, charts, diagrams, models, and technical drawings, including architectural plans. Such works shall include works of artistic craftsmanship insofar as their form, but not their mechanical or utilitarian aspects are concerned. Again, you've got an exclusion in here. It would have to be patented. The design of a useful article, as defined in this section, shall be considered a pictorial, graphic, or sculptured work only if, and only to the extent that, such design incorporates pictorial, graphic, or sculptural features that can be identified separately from and are capable of existing independently of the utilitarian aspects of the article. When we're looking at pictorial works, we're really looking at things like pictures and illustrations and paintings or statues and sculptures, which normally when you have them, you have a single copy of them. Then we have this other term. It says financial gain, and I pulled this out because it's important. It says financial gain includes receipt or expectation of receipt of anything of value, including the receipt of other copyrighted works. When you're talking about financial gain, you don't have to get anything out of it, but you can expect to get something out of it, and that would be an expectation of receipt of anything of value. So if your job is dependent on your creating work or something that you get from somebody else, that really comes down to an expectation of something of value. So therefore, you have to be very cognizant about financial gain, because financial gain is really a very loose term in here. Exclusive rights in copyrighted work. Subject to sections 107 through 122, the owner of a copyright under this title has the exclusive rights to do and to authorize any of the following: to reproduce the copyrighted work in copies or phonorecords, to prepare derivative works based on the copyrighted work. A derivative work would be a later on work that started out with the original one. To distribute copies or phonorecords of the copyrighted work to the public by sale or transfer of ownership, or by rental, lease, or lending. In the case of literary, musical, dramatic, and choreographic works, pantomimes, and motion pictures, and other audiovisual works, to perform the copyrighted work publicly. In the case of literary, musical, dramatic, and choreographic works, pantomimes, and pictorial, graphical, and sculptural works, including the individual images of a motion picture or other audiovisual work, to display the copyrighted work publicly. And in the case of sound recordings, to perform copyrighted work publicly by means of a digital audio transmission. As a copyright owner, you can do all of these things without infringing upon your own copyright. We also have what we call fair use. And fair use is in 107. It says, notwithstanding the provision of sections 106 and 106A, the fair use of a copyrighted work, including the use by reproduction in copies or phonographic records, or by any other means specified by that subject for the purpose such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, including multiple copies for classroom use, scholarship, or research, is not an infringement of copyright. In determining whether the use made of a work in any particular case is a fair use, the factors to be considered shall include the purpose and character of the use, including whether use is of a commercial nature or for nonprofit educational purposes, the nature of the copyrighted work, the amount and sustainability of the portion used in relation to the copyrighted work as a whole, and the effect of the use upon the potential market or value of the copyrighted work. We're dealing with a lot of stuff that goes back to the part on education and research and everything, and that's why when we deal with copyright here, we always talk about making sure that you cite your other sources. So when you cite your other sources and you tell exactly where it's coming from, you are not infringing on the copyright because you're saying, this is where I got it from. If you take a picture out of somewhere and you reproduce that picture in your thing and you're saying in that you got it from this place, and don't say, by permission of author unless you actually have their written permission to do so, you're not infringing the copyright part. You look at something, it's relative to your class that you're going to teach today. You go out, you make copies, you put it on a PowerPoint, you show it to everybody. That's not infringement of copyright. Now, if you do that once, that's fine. If you use that same lecture time and time and time and time again, you better get permission to use it, because there it comes down to the amount and sustainability of the portion used in relation to the copyright work as a whole. If you take somebody's entire copyrighted work and you include it in your lesson, you need to make sure that you've either got permission or that what you're doing is fine. Sometimes I will use other people's work, but what I do is rather than say it's mine, I go and I give you a link so that you can look at the other work, and I don't have any control of it. Therefore, it is no longer in my part here. So you also have to be very careful about this part. The other thing they look at is the effective use upon a potential market for or value of the copyrighted work. You can't go out and PDF a book and give it to your students. You're really messing up the market in there because you are taking somebody else's thing of value away from them. The fact that a work is unpublished shall not itself bar a finding of fair use if such finding is made upon consideration of the above factors. So when you look at, you may have done something, you may have taken a photograph, you didn't say anything about it to anybody, somebody else picks it up, they use it, they go out there and they publish a book and they sell 1,000,000 copies of the book. You got them on fair use of your material because they didn't get your authorization to be able to use it, and there is a certain amount of potential market value for the copyrighted piece in there, and therefore you have to be careful with these things. Notice of copyright. Visual perceptible copies. This is 17401. General provisions. Whenever a work protected under this title is published in the United States or elsewhere by authority of the copyright owner, a notice of copyright as provided by this section may be placed on publicly distributed copies from which the work can be visually perceived either directly or with the aid of a machine or device. Form of notice. If notice appears on the copies, it shall consist of the following 3 elements. 1. The symbol copyright, letter C, in a circle, or the word copyright, or the abbreviation COPR, and the year of first publication of the work in the case of compilations or derivative works incorporating previously published material, the year and date of first publication and the compilation or derivative work is sufficient. The year date may be omitted where a pictorial, graphic, or sculptural work with the accompanying text matter, if any, is reproduced in or on greeting cards, postcards, stationery, jewelry, dolls, toys, or any useful articles, and name of the owner of the copyright in the work, or an abbreviation by which the name can be recognized, or a generally known alternative designation of the owner. The notice shall be affixed to the copies in such manner and location to give reasonable notice of the claimant of copyright. The registry of copyrights shall be prescribed by regulation as examples specified methods of affixation and positions in the notice of various types of works that will satisfy this requirement, but these specifications shall not be considered exhaustive, which basically says, if you're going to copyright something, you better tell everybody it's copyrighted. If you've got a picture of it in your drawer and nobody else sees it, it doesn't really matter. But if you go out and you're going to copyright it, you better have notice of copyright in it. And that becomes very important. A lot of times that notice of copyright comes in the very end. If you look at a book, it's in the first couple of pages of the book and nobody really pays attention to it, but it's there and it has to be there. Now, here it says, evidentiary weight of notice. If a notice of copyright in the form and position specified by the section appears on the published copy or copies to which a defendant in a copyright infringement suit had access, then no weight shall be given to the defendant's interposition of a defense based on innocent infringement in mitigation of actuary and statutory damages except as provided in the last sentence of section 504.2. Which means if you've got this protection in here and this notice in here, and somebody else comes out and says, well, I was just using it for, this and that, it doesn't matter. Because if you've got the protection, they have the right to say, well, I guess I did it. And so therefore copyright becomes very important in here. There's also 407, which talks about deposit of copies or phonographic records for the Library of Congress. One of the things you do with literary works and everything is you deposit them in the Library of Congress. Now, when you go out and you deal with these things and you take your thesis, for example, and you put it on ProQuest. ProQuest has this thing where you can fill out the little form and they will deposit it for you at the Library of Congress, and you pay the certain amount of money. And if you don't want to pay the money, don't check the box. You can still write copyright in it. That's not a problem. But, you have to be careful about the deposition part in here, because in order to be really within the realm of where they want it to be, it should be deposited. It says, except as provided in subsection C and subject to provisions of subsection E, the owner of a copyright or the exclusive right of publication in a work published in the United States shall deposit within 3 months after the date of such publication 2 complete copies of the best edition, or if the work is a sound recording, 2 complete phonorecords of the best edition, together with any printed or other visually perceptible materials published with such phonorecords. So when you go out there and you write a book, you're supposed to deposit 2 copies of the book with Library of Congress. You go through a publishing house, and the publishing house will do this for you. It's part of the service that they provide when they do these. but you are supposed to go out and get the copyright form on that because it becomes very important. Now, the caveat down here says, neither the deposit requirements of this subsection nor the acquisition provisions of subsection E are conditions of copyright protection. Which means if you forgot to send it in, it doesn't matter. You still have copyright protection, provided you've got the proper symbols and proper identification of that particular part on your document. So copyright becomes very important. Now, we talk about fair use. And this is the real kicker, because fair use really comes down to, what is it fair for me to use out of a book so that I can go out there and use it in my class or something like that? Fair use comes down to commercial purposes. What is the commercial value in it? Because when we looked at fair use, it says there's a certain value in things that we do, and what is the value that you get out of it, and what is the value that the copyright owner could anticipate this particular thing would be worth, and are you affecting their ability to get what the value is? We all know that textbooks are mega expensive and probably too expensive for what they really need to be, but there is an industry that goes out there and does the textbook part, and therefore they have to be able to protect what they have. What is an educational purpose? We use it for teaching in a classroom. That's an educational purpose. How far out does that extend? Can I go out and copy a chapter out of a book and tell you to read this? That's where we like to have things that are open sourced, because if it's open sourced, anybody can use it. But if it's out of a chapter in a book, how do we go out there and say, well, I'm using that for an educational purpose? If you make one copy of a photograph and you put it on your presentation one time, that's probably going to be considered fair use. However, if you repeat that presentation time and time again with that particular thing, it's getting out of the fair use part. Do you use it for a display in a classroom? Is that fair use? That's always the question. You put a recording of your lecture for display on YouTube. So I put these things up on YouTube so anybody can look at them. Let's say I've got an image that I got out of a textbook. Is that fair use now? Because now I'm putting it out to lots of people. And when I put it out to lots of people, the potential for views on this now goes way up. And does that detract from the ability of the individual who made that to garnish money? In today's society, what I do is, if I'm going to put something up on YouTube, it's either my stuff, which means it's original, or I get somewhere where it is open sourced, where they give you the ability to use that particular thing without problems. One, if you take a PDF copy of presentation for distribution to people at a seminar, is that fair use if it contains someone else's picture in it? I'm not talking about you got a thing about the Mona Lisa and you go out and you take a picture of the Mona Lisa and you put it up there. Hey, that's perfectly normal because you took a picture of it, and you can do that and now say that I took the picture of the Mona Lisa by Da Vinci. That's fine. But what happens if you take a picture out of a textbook because it's a good thing that you don't have to reproduce somewhere, and you put it out there and you distribute it to people at a seminar? Is that still fair use? And I'm probably going, I think you've gone beyond the realm of where you should be. So we should always look at these. What happens? You take a PDF copy of a presentation for distribution to people in a classroom setting. I would say that if you brought that same presentation to colloquium and you presented it to everybody in the department, that's probably going to go down under the fair use thing. But if you take it to a national meeting and you do the same thing at a national meeting, this is now the second time you've done it. It's now to a much larger audience. I think you're pushing the fair use well beyond where it is. And the only caveat you have to worry about is whether or not the copyright owner comes down and looks at that. So when we talk about copyright, we talk about two parts. We talk about copyright protection itself, talk about fair use. Both of these are important because they protect intellectual property.